carefully. Fool me twice, I'm your enemy. I'm your enemy. Run, you better run. Vendetta, run, you better. Vendetta.
So in preparation for the Addiction to YA essay video that I'm planning on releasing in a month or so, I do have a few videos that I kind of wanted to get out beforehand that are sort of related to that topic. Mostly because it's a very broad subject to cover, I'm finding. Doing some research on BookTube and doing some research online, I'm finding that there's a lot of different perspectives and there's a lot of different things that people have to say on this topic, mostly about the age range debate, the fact that the age range is kind of negated and adults are having more influence on books that are supposed to be directed for teens. Some people think that it's just creepy. And then you have the argument that are for it. Adults should be able to read whatever they want, no judgment passed. I'm kind of in the middle. I just want to clarify that right now. I am that adult that reads mostly YA. I'm going to explain why in one of the following videos because that's a topic that I wanted to get into probably right before the essay video is released. I have my reasons. It's too long of a thing to get into right now. But I just wanted to clarify that I'm not against adults reading YA. I'm not against adults enjoying YA. I'm not even against adults primarily enjoying YA. Obviously, there's a lot of opinions on that. There's a lot of people that believe that, most adults go towards the YA genre because they don't like the challenge of more adult fiction. I try not to limit myself solely to YA because I do believe that it's important to kind of have varied taste and try to gain experience in other realms and break outside your comfort zone a little bit. But the video I'm working on is not a hate video directed at anyone. Trying to kind of play neutral, kind of trying to play the middle ground. Obviously, I have certain thoughts and feelings about certain things. That doesn't mean that I think anything goes. That also doesn't mean that I don't have strong opinions when it comes to certain topics, which is kind of why I wanted to release a few videos beforehand to kind of get into these discussions so that when I do release that video, they can kind of reference these next few videos that'll be coming out for the next few weeks. I really have been wanting to get into this subject for a minute now, particularly the obsession that BookTube has for the fairy stuff, the fairy realms, the fairy YA. I don't get it. Personally, I do not understand it. I recently reread the audiobook for Court of Thorns and Roses and wanted to give it a second chance because admittedly I was kind of hate reading it the first time. It did not disappoint. Didn't give it a fair enough chance. I wanted to understand where everyone was coming from when they say that it's a great book, it's a great series. Granted, I have not read the entire series yet. I made it halfway through the sequel the first time I was reading it before I got bored, and I've heard a lot of people still rave about that series, but that's not the only fairy series. It's a huge obsession right now. I think the main factor that's involved and the main reason that most people on BookTube, most girls are really into these series is because of the fantasy aspect. And with that fantasy aspect, it's the fantasy romance aspect. One of the most disturbing aspects of these stories is how centered around Beauty and the Beast the romance seems to be. It's like everything these days is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Now, I loved that Disney film growing up. I had also read, the original Beauty and the Beast. I love the French version. If you haven't seen it, it is beautiful. It is great. It is better than Disney's remake. If you can stand subtitles, definitely give it a watch. The fantasy idea of the relationship of the broken, cursed man who just needs a nice woman to find good in him and to see through his flaws, to find out, he's really a good person inside and he needs a chance. I ate that shit up, especially in my teens. That is one of my biggest Achilles heel, and I think it's an Achilles heel for a lot of women. I think that's why it sells so well. However, due to recent personal events, I have had to reflect on my tastes and I've had to reflect on my mindset, and I'm not going to fully blame that fantasy aspect for my mindset, but I would be lying if I didn't say that it didn't play an influence on how I viewed people in real life. There is a lot of debate when it comes to adults who read these kinds of subjects who are heavily addicted to the smut. They're addicted to, and it's just getting dirtier by the day. I will open a book and it's far from the days of 50 Shades of Grey, and it's in a whole other And if you're well aware that's a fantasy and you're well aware that you have control of your emotions and control of your own mindset, go for it. But I do think, given Wattpad, and I'm also working on a video concerning that, that's the only area that I will say that I feel like we should start changing. We should start, saying no to certain things, but I'll get into that later. The influence that we are having on kids, the influence that adults are having on the teens' fiction in YA. Very impressionable young ages. We need to write with a certain awareness, and we need to maintain a certain awareness that we have younger readers who are being exposed to these things who are not fully developed yet when it comes to making logical decisions. Part of my research that I have been doing is on teens and the whole age range debate and everything. Adults tend to be fully developed. Our brains are fully developed around 25. Teens are very impressionable and very emotionally driven. I do believe that this is why so much young adult tends to favor more character-driven stories, tend to favor more emotional retellings, emotional tellings of certain stories. But it is disturbing to read books like After, to see what's being pushed on sites like Wattpad, mostly by older women. Fine, do your thing. And it's not our responsibility to make sure that other kids are being brought up properly. I understand that. I don't want to tell writers, you need to kind of limit yourself, but I do think we need to open the discussion for having this kind of awareness for two reasons. One, it sets them up for failure. In real life, if you're consuming all of this stuff, it will influence your mindset. You will tend to pursue these actions, and even if you're telling yourself this isn't real, this isn't real life, books like After, I do believe, especially when I see TikToks and I see kids who are getting in relationships very young, who are clearly unaware of how the real world works, will admit that they fall for somebody that ends up hurting them. They didn't have enough awareness. And I think this isn't just due to books. I think movies can also be responsible. Obviously, women have, the rom-com era, especially the 90s and 2000s, reshaped our whole mindset on how we viewed romance and how we viewed men from societal standards and societal expectations as far as the female role and the male role when it comes to relationships, when it comes to marriages. We're kind of breaking these barriers. We're kind of moving past that, and it's great to see. But I'm also seeing a side of it that's rooted in old toxic habits that might continue to be carried over. I would think that we would want the next generation to kind of break through the struggles that we had. Obviously, every generation is going to have their own struggles anyways, but one of the things that has really held us back is the old traditions and the old way of doing things, the old beliefs. It is a psychological fact that, for most, habits tend to repeat. They tend to carry over, and it is very, very difficult to break that cycle. It's very encouraging to see so many people want to break that cycle, but I do think that we kind of need to be more aware in today's day of who we are writing for and what influence we're going to have on this new generation. Now, the thing with YA is a lot of kids that started reading YA, this series tends to grow with them. So instead of growing out of it and moving into another genre, they prefer this format. They prefer this type of storytelling, except they're not teens anymore. Now they're dissatisfied because this genre is not growing with them. And I get we all have our fantasies, and I get that, I'm not saying that writers should never write this kind of stuff, should never fantasize this kind of stuff, but maybe it is worth taking a look into as far as how much of it we're pumping out on a regular basis, how much influence we're really having on these younger audiences. Limerence, I feel could play a very big role. Books like After, books like Twilight are examples of characters that would exhibit limerence, which is this state of mind, this obsession, this infatuation. So much so, you don't even see what's real. You don't even see what's going on in front of you or what actually is. I believe that we're kind of coming into this more open and honest discussion about realities and about expectations. But I feel there's still plenty of literature, there's still plenty of old ways that we're kind of having an effect and having an influence on the younger generation. I know a lot of writers aren't going to want to hear it because writers want to write what they want to write. I completely understand that. I have my own fantasies. I have my own stuff that I like to write out. I have my own worlds that I like to create. And I will admit, I write mostly teen to young adult to new adult protagonists. I completely understand it. But I also think that we need to be aware, especially when we're writing like the smut fiction and the spicy fairy stuff and everything, it's not just like the exposure to the graphic side of it. That's kind of a concern by being, exposed to it too young of an age. But you also have the subliminal messaging and the lessons throughout that I feel like have been very, very underdeveloped. They've been very cliche, they've been very tropey, and it is reminiscent of the rom-com era from the 90s and the 2000s that kind of were giving women this. When you have people in the real world who know how to play the part, you are eager to open up to, you are eager to let them in because of everything that subliminally you accept, you believe, even if you are telling yourself like it is just a fantasy, fairies don't really exist, you're still kind of naive. You're young. You've yet to learn, and the only way to learn is through experiences. And I understand that. Like, no amount of cushioning or baby proofing is going to protect kids from getting hurt. Even adults, the more I'm learning, I'm also learning adults are struggling to break out of this mindset that they had for so long because this mindset is stuck in the genre itself. I've come to find out that there are a lot of people that are very good at putting on an act, very good at giving you what you want and giving you enough of what you want to keep buying into your own fantasy, to keep buying into your version of the truth. In short, the real world is not like the fantasy world. It's important to be able to distinguish the two. I am a little concerned when it comes to this genre. The more that I read, especially after rereading the Wither series, for me to turn around and admit that what used to be one of my favorite books in the dystopian era is like as troublesome to read and as disturbing to read. Knowing that my mindset used to be completely somewhere else, realizing that I kind of let myself buy more into that fantasy kind of makes me more aware when I'm writing who I'm really writing for, who my target audience is. Adults who want to write smut and need to figure out who they're really writing for. Adults who are writing teen romances that are super graphic need to have a level of awareness and responsibility for where you're directing the story and the young minds and the young impressionable minds that are going to be picking up these stories. The fairy YA, the fairy new adult, is probably some of the most toxic romance like ideas and themes I have come across, I think, in the genre. I know smut can go like hardcore. I know that there's like whole other avenues that I don't want to explore. I'm not saying that, oh, this is as dirty as it gets, this is as disturbing as it gets. I know the rabbit hole is deep and I have no intention of going down there anytime soon. The difference is a lot of this fairy stuff feels like it's being written more so for adults because more adults are buying into it, because it feels like adults are trying to have this influence and trying to change the genre that is meant for teens. This is where a lot of the discourse for adults reading so much YA is coming from. Is not the fact that they're reading YA, it's not the fact that they're reading primarily YA, it's the fact that they refuse to grow out of the genre that they have clearly grown out of, and they are trying to influence and thus change a genre that is meant for a specific age group. There's always going to be problematic tropes and problematic cliches and shit in teenage books anyway. I'm saying the binging and the gorging and the bragging and the boasting, the gluttony of all of like the spicy fiction books, just read smut in the genre where it belongs, because it's bleeding way too much into certain age groups that I feel like it could be dangerous for them later on down the road. Mentally, emotionally, possibly physically. So yeah, that's my little rant for the day. Clearly kind of like on the spot. I didn't really do my makeup. My life is like changing. I've got a lot of aspects in it that are coming to a head and that I have to put back together again. It's gonna be a lot of work, probably for the next year or two, so bear with me. But I'm going to release a couple more videos diving more into like the age range debate and diving more into booktube and YA in the next few weeks before I finally release the YA addiction video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I just think this is something that we should have a discussion about and we should allow to be honest about, especially as writers. We're the ones putting out the material. I did state in my Politics and Altitude video, we have more power than we realize. And I think it's important to start having open and honest discussions instead of shying away from topics that other writers are going to get offended by or are going to let their egos be like, well, I'm going to write whatever I want. They write whatever you want, but you need to figure out who you're writing for. That's all I'm saying. All right, I'll see you guys in my next video.